for the love of our 10th Imam, Ali al-Hadi, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal farajah. Some of the ayat that we are going to be looking at tonight, if you want to open your Qur'ans and get to the chapter number 78 of the Quran, Surah An-Naba. Chapter number 78, Surah An-Naba, from verse number 8 to verse number 16. We will be looking at other verses as well, inshallah, but this should be sufficient for now for us to be able to have open for us. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم عما يتساءلون عن النبأ العظيم الذي هم فيه مختلفون كلا سيعلمون ثم كلا سيعلمون ألم نجعل الأرض مهادا والجبال أوتادا وخلقناكم أزواجا وجعلنا نومكم سباتا وجعلنا الليل لباسا وجعلنا النهار معاشا وبنينا فوقكم سبعا شدادا وجعلنا سراجا وهاجا وأنزلنا من المعصرات ماء ثجاجا لنخرج به حبا ونباتا وجنات ألفافا آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه. Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Our gathering is to commemorate the martyrdom anniversary of our 10th Imam, Ali al-Hadi salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. Our condolences go out to the master of our age, Imam al-Mahdi, ajjalallahu ta'ala faraj al-sharif, to all of our maraja al-kiram, the mu'mineen and mu'minat, and indeed the whole of humanity, for the death anniversary of Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam is an anniversary that the entirety of humanity can commemorate in. One of the most famous ahadith which reaches us from our 10th Imam al-Hadi salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh is one in which he is narrated to have said, either on his deathbed or in the last hours of his life, as the poison is running through his body. The hadith is as follows: when a person dies, a person will only be in two states, one of two states. Either that person, when they die, they shall be relieved, or everything else will be relieved by his death. A person will find themselves in one of two states. The first state is that they, when they die, will be relieved. Why? Because of the effort that they have put into their life. They have exhausted themselves in doing good deeds, in trying to make a difference in the world, and as an outcome, when they die, finally they will be relieved and have some rest which will come to them in their graves. You often hear a kind of famous statement or a funny thing where someone says, "I'll rest when I die." No, that's when I'll be able to put my feet up. Until then, I continue to work. I continue to strive and struggle to be able to make a difference. Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam says that the first person, when he dies, his type of feeling will be that he will feel relief by virtue of finally being given some rest from the difficulties that the world has thrown upon him. The second type of person, he himself will not be relieved, but rather others will be relieved from him by virtue of his death. Meaning that this person has had such a negative impact on creation, on the world, that by virtue of Allah having now taken this person from the world, the rest of creation will now be at rest because of his being taken away. People will be at rest because they will no longer have to deal with his tyranny. Or, for example, nature will be at rest because of this person's exploitation of the natural world. Everything else will now be relieved by virtue of this person's death. Immediately you and I can reflect on this and think about what it means at the point of our death. Will it be that we are relieved, or would it be that others are relieved by virtue of our being taken away from this earth? This hadith, inshallah, will be the bedrock of our discussion tonight, and we will return back to it in a few minutes, inshallah. But first we will regale ourselves with some fada'il of our 10th Imam Ali al-Hadi salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. Allahumma salli. Our Imam alayhi salam was born in a village just outside the city of Medina al-Munawwarah, which was the name of Surayya. The name of this little village was Surayya, which was actually started by his great-grandfather, the 7th Imam Musa al-Kadhim salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. The Imam alayhi salam became the Imam at the age of just 7 years old. And as you know, the previous Imam, his father Al-Jawad alayhi salam, became the Imam at a tender age as well. And so now the Shia had been well prepared for the experience of having a young Imam in front of them. However, the tyrants of the time had decided to take a different way in order to be able to stop the movement of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. Previously, it was their norm to really just arrest the Imams, to take them away from the eyes of the people. And so they felt that by arresting them, you would not give position to the Imam Ma'soom in order to be able to spread the teachings of Islam. Al-Mu'tasim al-Abbasi decided for the first time to take a different tact. And that was, at the age of 7 years old, to give Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam a teacher, in the hope that this teacher would give to him different interpretations of Islam, different understandings, and so would swerve the path of our 10th Imam alayhi salam away from that of Islam. Of course, this shows the complete misunderstanding of al-Mu'tasim in relationship to what is a Ma'soom Imam even though he was of such a tender age, of the age of 7 years old. Famously, what happened? He decided that he would find him a teacher. He told his I would use the word fixer, a person who does things on his behalf, by the name of Umar al-Faraj, or Umar ibn al-Faraj, to be the person to find a suitable teacher for the 10th Imam alayhi salam. What's interesting is, in history, Umar al-Faraj, his brother Muhammad ibn al-Faraj was a great Shia, was a follower of the 10th Imam alayhi salam. So in one household, Umar ibn al-Faraj was the one to carry out the commands of the Caliph al-Mu'tasim al-Abbasi. Whereas the brother Muhammad ibn al-Faraj was the one who was such a supporter of the Imam, and actually a great narrator of ahadith from the 10th Imam alayhi salam. Anyway, Umar ibn al-Faraj traveled to the city of Medina, and there asked the governor, who can we find who is not only a really knowledgeable teacher, but someone who is also a hater of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, that can take this responsibility to teach Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam. And he found him a teacher. What is interesting is that this sort of house arrest of the 10th Imam and finding a teacher to be able to teach him lasted 2 whole years. In the first year, when Imam alayhi salam was under this sort of house arrest and being forced to be taken a teacher, after 1 year, one of the companions of the Imam by the name of Muhammad ibn Ja'far saw this teacher in the streets and asked him, tell me about the boy that you have in your house that you are teaching. Now this, of course, was language to kind of lower the station of the Imam. Tell me about the boy that is in your house. But he could only use this language as a means of taqiyya, to hide his faith. Otherwise, this would have given rise to suspicion that he was a Shia of the time. So to try to lower his station, the companion asks the teacher, tell me about this boy that is in your house. The man responded by saying, boy? Don't say boy. Say sheikh. Say knowledgeable individual is in the house. This was after 1 year. After a second year, again Muhammad ibn Ja'far sees the teacher and again asks him and says, tell me about the boy that is in your house under your tutelage. And again the man becomes very angry and says, didn't I say to you last time, don't call him boy, call him sheikh? Not a day begins but that when he enters into the room for my teaching him, I ask for him to recite a chapter of the Quran by heart. And I choose for him from the longest of chapters to recite from the Quran. Not only does he recite it absolutely correct, he recites it in the most beautiful of tones, and then he begins to teach me about the meanings of the verses such that I had never understood them in the first place. This is this individual who is in my house, Ali al-Hadi, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. I mentioned that the hadith that I want to focus on is one that was stated by the Imam alayhi salam in the last days of his life, when he states, when a person dies, either he is relieved because he now has to separate, give up himself from this world which has fatigued him, or others are relieved by his death. Either he is relieved at his death, or others are relieved by virtue of him finally dying because of the amount of oppression that he has done. Holding on to this hadith, what I want to do, inshaAllah, is to look at some ahadith from the 10th Imam and think about some of the things that he has left for us in regards to this particular hadith. We all know that the 10th Imam alayhi salam is preparing the Shia for the period of the ghaibah, a lengthy period of ghaibah. Much of what the Imam had to do was to prepare institutions ready for the Shia who would slowly be away from their Imam Ma'soom. One of the things that the Imam did was tell the Shia how to deal with contradictory narrations. For example, one of the things that the Imam did was teach the Shia how to have wukala and representatives that can both deal with the questions of the Shia as well as collect the taxes and distribute the taxes of the Shia. And these are the sorts of things that the 10th Imam had to put in place. For example, one of the Shia wrote to Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam and said to him, Ibn Rasulullah, from time to time we come across hadith that contradict hadith from another Imam. What should we do? Now, as we mentioned even yesterday, as you know, there are forgeries of ahadith. They were not just forgeries against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There were forgeries done in the name of the A'imma alayhimus salam. But also sometimes there are sound hadith. But sometimes the Imam Ma'soom says something in taqiyya, so he says it, but he only says it for a period of time, or he only says it in order to escape potential killing. So the hadith reaches the companion, but it could have been said in taqiyya. The Imam doesn't know, should I follow it or should I not follow it? Or sometimes the Imam is giving one particular answer to an individual, but then another individual has asked a different question or a similar question, and he has got a different answer. All of these different issues were reaching the Shia. And you can imagine the number of different ahadith that might reach Shia as they were in circulation at that time. The Imam received a letter. What do we do when we receive contradictory narrations from you? Imam alayhi salam responded by saying, if you are certain, if you have yaqeen, this hadith is from us, Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, you have to follow it. And if you are not certain, if you have some doubt that this hadith is not from us, return the hadith back to us so we can inform you as to whether the hadith is true or not. What does it mean? Return the hadith back to us. Either, number one, ask us, Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, did you say this? In what context did you say this? Is this still applicable? Or return this hadith back to ayat of Quran or other ahadith to see whether it fits or not. If the hadith is in line with our fikr, our thinking, if it is in accordance with our way, then you know that the hadith is sound. If the hadith is contradictory, then you have a way to be able to accept or reject the hadith. You can see here the 10th Imam is preparing the Shia with a methodology of how to be able to live without the presence of an Imam Ma'soom. And this, of course, was one of the challenges of our 10th Imam, Al-Hadi salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. After Al-Mu'tasim Al-Abbasi came the Caliph Al-Mutawakkil Al-Abbasi. Al-Mu'tasim had sought to be able to give the 10th Imam a teacher. Al-Mutawakkil was more old school. He decided to go the normal route of basically arresting the Imam Ma'soom and forcing him to leave his city and migrate to the city where the Caliph was residing, which at that time was Samarra, which had become the capital city of the Muslim Ummah. Samarra was basically a garrison city. And so it was like what we might say a town, a city that was created for the purpose of soldiers having a resting point, a place for them to be able to rest, for them to have their armories, and eventually this city Samarra became the capital city. So it was like a garrison city. It was like a city that was constantly with thousands of soldiers either coming in or out of it at any one time. The Imam was living in the city of Medina. He was arrested and he was taken to Samarra. When he was arrested by a man named Yahya, who was kind of the head of the guard to come and arrest the Imam and have a huge entourage to drag him to the city of Samarra. The hadith mentions that when Yahya entered into the house, the family of Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam began to wail and cry, thinking that the Caliph had decided to kill Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam. Yahya says, he narrates in the hadith, that when the family of Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam were crying and screaming and begging for his safety, I explained, I don't have any orders to harm him. I have orders to arrest and take him. So that calmed the family of Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam down a little bit. Yahya continues in the hadith. He says, the first thing I had to do was search the house. Weapons, money, anything to suggest that there was a sort of overthrow, an impending sort of overthrow of the Caliph. All I found was his prayer mat, Quran, and some books. Yahya says, I confiscated those things from him and told him that in the morning we would leave, and he had to pack whatever small belongings that he would have, his clothes or whatever, and we had to take him out to Samarra. It now comes to the point of the hadith where Yahya says that the next day, on that afternoon as we were departing, I noticed Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam do something a little bit strange. I saw him put on a cloak, a sort of, in my language, how I will use it, a rain jacket, right? Something to protect him from the rain. I saw Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam put on the rain jacket and tie the tail of his animal. Now, I don't know whether it was a horse or a camel, whatever. I saw him tie the tail of his animal. And I watched him do this, and I didn't understand why he was doing this. He then ascended onto his animal, maybe his horse, with his rain jacket on, and we began to be prepared to leave. As we began to leave, a few minutes later, all of a sudden, it started to rain heavily. At this point, Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam turned to me and said, I know that you were confused by what I was doing a few minutes ago. But it's not as you think. Meaning, I did not gain this knowledge that it was about to rain heavily by ilm al-ghayb. This is not how I sought this knowledge, Imam is saying. It's not as you think that I have some extraordinary knowledge of this event coming. Rather, I grew up in Suraya, in this desert town outside of Medina. And so from a young age, I learned when the winds shift, the sound of them, and the smell of them, that is going to carry heavy rains. And so this morning when I woke up, I felt the types of weather and the types of humidity, and I smelt the type of air that was in the atmosphere, and I knew it was going to rain. So when we were departing from my house to Samarra, I put on the rain jacket, in my words, the rain jacket, and I tied the tail of my animal. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that signifies. Maybe because it's very windy, it's going to go here or there. I don't know. But anyway, the Imam says, I tied the tail of my animal. I just want to focus on this. The hadith I mentioned at the beginning. Either when a person dies, you will be relieved, or others will be relieved from you. And I want to focus on this hadith that the Imam says, I grew up in a desert town and I understand the way the winds work and what it signifies and what weather patterns are going to come from it. So at the beginning I asked everyone to open their Qur'ans, and I know some of us have just come in a couple of minutes after I asked that. So please open Surah Naba, which is chapter number 78 of the Quran, from verse 6 onwards. Everyone is there, inshallah? Yes? Surah An-Naba. Surah An-Naba is the first chapter of Juz Amma. It starts, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Amma yatasa'aloon 'anil naba'il azim. Verse number 6. Alam naj'alil arda mihada. Have we not made the earth an expanse? Have we not made the earth very expanded for you to be able to live on? Wal jibala awtada, and the mountains as pegs. You know, anyone here who's gone camping, when you put up your tent, what do you need to hold the tent down? Pegs. If you don't put pegs in, what happens? It blows away. Allah Jalla Jalaluhu has made the earth with pegs, and those pegs are the mountains. So above the earth's surface we see lofty mountains. Below the surface, the mountains continue, and what they do is they act like pegs, making sure that the earth remains stable. This is mentioned in several verses of the Quran and is well known for geologists and other specialities of these sciences. Alam naj'alil arda mihada. Have we not made the earth an even expanse? Wal jibala awtada. And we have made the mountains as pegs. Wa khalaqnakum azwajan. Have we not made you in pairs? Now there's many meanings to this. It doesn't necessarily mean you and your wife, or your wife and your husband. It means everything in creation has been made in pairs. Night and day. Dry and wet. Life and death. Allah Jalla Jalaluhu has made everything in pairs in creation. وَخَلَقْنَاكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا وَجَعَلْنَا نَوْمَكُمْ سُبَاتًا. And we have made we have made your sleep to be a means of rest for you. These are one of the things that are in pairs. Sleep brings rest, a resetting of the body, a resetting of the mind. In the Arabic language, subatan, the root word sabata, means sort of to discontinue, to rest. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made your sleep for you to be a means of you to rest. وَجَعَلْنَا نَوْمَكُمْ سُبَاتًا وَجَعَلْنَا اللَّيْلَ لِبَاسًا. And He's made the night for you as a covering, for you to have your privacy, for you to be able to look after yourselves. وَجَعَلْنَا النَّهَارَ مَعَاشًا. And He has made the day for you to be the means of your gaining livelihood. Your ma'asha, the ways in which you need to live, and all the duties that you need to take care of in your day-to-day life. وَبَنَيْنَا فَوْقَكُمْ سَبْعًا شِدَادًا. And we have made above you 7 strong layers of atmosphere. وَجَعَلْنَا سِرَاجًا وَهَّاجًا. And we have made a shining lamp, the sun. وَأَنزَلْنَا مِنَ الْمُعْصِرَاتِ مَاءً ثَجَّاجًا. And we have sent down from the clouds water pouring in abundance. Why? لِنُخْرِجَ بِهِ حَبًّا وَنَبَاتًا وَجَنَّاتٍ أَلْفَافًا. So that we may bring forth corn and herbs and gardens and luxuriant types of growth. Our Mufassirin tell us that these sets of verses that we have just read are verses that speak to the issue of the natural rhythms of life. What we mean by natural rhythms of life is that Allah Jalla Jalaluhu has created within the system of His creation the ways in which we can live in a way that allows us to be able to live well with nature. These are called today, in Western language, rhythms of life. In the Arabic word, in the Quranic language, these are called ayat, Allah's signs for us. Allah has created ways for us to live. And one of the ways that He has created for us to live is in accordance with nature, and not to be at war with nature. Not to be outside of the system of creation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created for us. In these sets of verses, you will notice Allah Jalla Jalaluhu teaches us about the construct of the world and the ways in which we can be in line with that. Let me give you an example. If you read with me, verse number 6 and 7. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alam naj'alil arda mihada wal jibala awtada. Allah has made it that the earth has pegs. The mountains act as pegs. If you destroy those pegs, what happens to the earth? The earth will shake, it will convulse. Now you've all got your phones open. I want you to search something. All of you, just go into Google. Tell me, what is that type of action that people are doing where they're blasting water into the earth's surface, into the earth's core, in order to be able to extract oil? What's it called? Say again? Fracking. So do me a favor. Write into Google, fracking, earthquake, UK. And tell me what comes up. Okay, do you want to read it out? Just give me the title and what's said in the first. Lancashire fracking. 2.9 magnitude tremor. What does it say? Are we supposed to be having earthquakes in Lancashire, or is this new? What does it say? Can you read it? Or anyone?
An earthquake with magnitude of 2.9 has been recorded in UK's only active shell gas site in Lancashire. The tremor near Blackpool was recorded about 8:30 BST, and it is stronger than those that forced Recruiter to suspend tests fracking in 2011.
Ahsan. Fracking is a new way that we can extract oil from the earth's, or below the earth's surface. In very brief, because I'm not an expert in fracking, we blast the water so deep into the earth's surface, and with the pressure we're able to locate and take out the oil. It's a different way of extracting oil that we are now doing. But around the world, because we are blasting water at such a pace into the earth's surface, it is breaking the pegs that God has created in the earth. It is shattering parts of the pegs from the bottoms of the mountains, and as a result, for the first time here in Lancashire, we are starting to get earthquakes, which we never used to get previously. Read the ayah. أَلَمْ نَجْعَلِ الْأَرْضَ مِهَادًا وَالْجِبَالَ أَوْتَادًا. Allah has created ayat, or what we term in the Western sense today, rhythms of life, ways that we should live in accordance with nature. And that if we go against nature, it is to our own deficit. Because we are not going to be the ones who outlive nature. Nature will continue on without us. It will be me and you that will get wiped off from the face of this planet. There's a book that came out in 2018 explaining the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene means that for the first time in the history of the planet, human beings are now considered to be a force of nature. When we say force of nature, it means we have had such an impact on the earth that we are like a force of nature. What's a force of nature? You know, like a hurricane, a tidal wave. Those things change the face of the Earth's surface, don't they? We just had a tsunami, sadly, a few weeks back in the islands off Australia and New Zealand. That's a force of nature. Human beings are called a force of nature now. The term for it is called the Anthropocene. That's the term for it. We have had such an impact on the earth that we now change the way in which nature itself is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us this set of verses, and many others, but this set of verses that talks to us about the structure of creation and how we are supposed to live. Read them once more. Really simple. Have we not made the earth an even expanse for you to live on? The mountains as pegs. We created you in pairs. We made your sleep to be rest for you. We made the night to be a covering. We made the day for you to be able to seek your livelihood. The reality is, the way in which we have begun to live has shifted the patterns against the forces of nature, and as a result, we ourselves are only hurting our own home, planet Earth. We've slowly started to begin to realize that the health of the planet is more important than even our own individual health. That actually, without the health of the planet, really there cannot be any health for us. If we continue to destroy rainforests, those things that are the lungs of the planet, that take dirty air and produce clean oxygen, if you destroy those rainforests, we do not have clean air to be able to breathe. If we warm the planet's atmosphere so much and the surface temperature so much that it destroys the icebergs, it will place so much water into the seas that low-lying lands are going to be submerged underwater. We begin to understand these things. The Quran is showing us that there are actually structures within creation. These are the ayat of Allah, the communications of Allah to us, and that we are supposed to be living in accordance with them and not in opposition to them. For when we do things like fracking, or when we begin to shift the ways in which we are living to be in opposition and exploitation of nature, it will actually be us that ends up becoming destroyed. Our 10th Imam Al-Hadi, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh, shows us this in this beautiful hadith. He says to Yahya, his captor, the person who's arresting him, I have lived in the desert such that I now know the ways of nature itself. And I know that when a certain type of wind blows, by virtue of how it blows and the smell in the air, I can tell whether it's going to rain heavily or not. The Imam lived in accordance with nature itself. The Imam's lifestyle was to be aware of the reality of nature such that he could live in accordance with it and not in opposition to it. Funny story. There is an American sheikh who tells this story. So I don't know this firsthand. I've heard it from a sheikh, and for me the sheikh is absolutely honest and truthful, and I have 100% certainty in this story. He says, in New York, there were a group of youth that frantically called 911. Why? So you know that during the lunar cycle, there are times when we can see the moon during the day, right? You look up in the sky and you can see the white outline of the moon, right? You've seen it. Yes? You've seen the moon during the day, yeah? Yeah? Have you seen it? Okay. You know what I'm talking about? Cool. So now, these youth, they had spent their life living in New York City. New York City has all these high-rise buildings. So whenever they would look up, they could barely see the sky. All they can see is 100-story buildings, 110-story buildings. So they'd never really seen anything. It was that this day they had a school trip and they were due to be taken outside of the city, and they would go outside for the first time to be able to go into more nature-esque type of areas. And as they were in this open fields, and they looked up, they saw that white outline of the moon in the sky for the first time. Do you know what they did? They called 911 frantically, saying, "The moon is falling in on us. We're going to be crushed by the moon." Now we smirk and we laugh, but these poor individuals had been kept so far away from nature that this was the first time in their life that they had seen the moon during the day, and they actually believed that the moon was going to fall in on them. It's a sheikh who was mentioning this story because it became headline news, that someone had called the police for this reason. The point I make is that Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam is showing us in our lives that there are ways of nature, and that we actually have to be aware of those as to the best of our capacity, lest we end up actually harming the ways in which we live. Think about this. Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam says in the last days of his life, when we die, either we will be relieved or creation will be relieved from us. Can you imagine when creation itself is pleased that we have been taken away from this earth? Because of the ways in which we have been living. Excuse me. Another hadith I want to mention to you from our 10th Imam, Ali al-Hadi, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. Hadith is as follows. Our 10th Imam alayhi salam says the following: Man ata'a al-khaliq lam yubali sakhat al-makhluqeen. The one who obeys the Creator does not have the fear of the wrath and the angers of the creatures upon him. Think about this. The Imam uses very specific language. Man ata' al-khaliq. Khaliq is Allah. The one who obeys the Khaliq, lam yubali sakhat al-makhluqeen. Makhluqeen is all of creation. He didn't say human beings. Imam in the hadith says, the one who obeys Allah, the Creator, does not have to fear the anger and the wrath of the rest of creation upon him. وَمَنْ أَسْخَطَ الْخَالِقِ. And the one who makes the Khaliq angry, فَلْيَيْقَنْ أَنْ يَحِلَّ بِهِ سَخَطُ الْمَخْلُوقِينَ. The one who makes Allah angry must know that the creatures of this creation will also become angry with him as well. For tonight, all I want to be able to do is to introduce this thought to us. That the Imam, in at least 3 occasions of his life, is speaking to matters of nature and the ways in which we are living with creation itself. The first one is when he is arrested and he shows how he understands nature and the rhythms of nature itself. The second is this hadith where he says that if we obey the Khaliq, the makhluqeen will be pleased with us. And if we disobey the Khaliq, the makhluqeen will be angry with us. And the third is the one on his deathbed that says that when we die, either we will be relieved or creation will be relieved by the virtue of us dying. It is definitely time upon us to be able to review the ways in which we live and to be able to reflect on the contribution to the earth that we are having. It is well known now that we are in a desperate state. 10 years from now, maybe less, we will have gone past a fail-safe point whereby we will not be able to work back in trying to bring the issue of global warming back to within a safe space. If we do not change the ways in which we are living to be in accordance with nature, then ultimately nature will continue to fight back against the force that is destroying nature, and that is us as human beings. We can see that in all aspects of our life, whether it be the volcanoes that are erupting, the freak natures of tornadoes and winds and everything else that is there. And unless you and I make changes, drastic changes to our way of life, we will see that these freak acts of nature will continue to become normal, and certainly we will feel the wrath of creation against us. Excuse me. Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam was poisoned, and when he was poisoned, the poison ran through his body such that it caused him such a great deal of discomfort. Before Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam was poisoned, he did one last major act that drew the wrath of the Caliph al-Mutawakkil al-Abbasi, ultimately caused al-Mutawakkil to poison our 10th Imam alayhi salam. What was that thing that he did? Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam bought a house inside Samarra. This was the indication to the Shia that Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam intended to stay in Samarra. What did that mean for the Shia? It meant that Shia in their thousands flocked to the city of Samarra in order to make it their new home. Previously the Shia, they were scattered. Some were living in Medina, some were living in Kufa, some were living in Qom. But seeing that Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam had bought a house in Samarra, the same way if mine and your Imam appeared and bought a house in a city, we would want to go and live close to him. Shia flocked to the city of Samarra. This put pressure under the Abbasid Caliph. And the only way he could stop this pressure, in his mind, was to murder the 10th Imam alayhi salam by giving to him poison. And this was the poison that ultimately killed our beloved Imam. The narration says that the Imam was lying on his deathbed, that the poison was running through his body, and as a result, he was suffering so much in pain and so much in discomfort. You can imagine the Imam suffering and shifting his body from side to side in order to find some moment of comfort away from the amount of pain that is running through his body. He begins to give his last wasiyyah to his companions, and amongst them are this hadith where he says that when a person dies, either he will become relieved or the rest of creation will become relieved from him. You can imagine Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam understanding this hadith for himself, that I will finally be relieved of al-Mutawakkil al-Abbasi. I will be relieved of this pain and suffering that is running through my body from this poison. The narration says that Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam had dug his own grave next to his bed. They asked him, Ya ibn Rasulullah, why is your grave next to your bed? He says, because right now when I rest, I take a little bit of comfort, a few minutes of comfort to myself, but I have this grave to remind me that this is my ultimate destination, and that the moment that I die, no longer will I lie on this bed, but rather I will lie on the dirt of this grave, and this will be my ultimate resting place. This is where I will spend the rest of my time from now. This is why I have dug my grave next to my own bed. The narration says that as the poison overtook the body of our beloved Imam Al-Hadi alayhi salam, that he began to say his final farewell. He turned his face towards the Qibla. He began to recite the Quran, and with his last breaths he was reciting the Quran, and this is how he passed away from this world. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. But you can imagine that at this moment there must have been thousands clambering around the house of Imam Al-Hadi alayhi salam, wishing to participate in his janazah. Thousands of Shia had flocked around him to be there with him in his last moments. But you can imagine the suffering of Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam, who was there around him in his last moments. There was only Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam. She was running from the tent into the killing field, back from the killing field back towards the tents. Why was she running between the killing fields and the tents? Because when she would run towards the killing field, she would want to be able to have a last glimpse of her brother Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam. But as she ran towards the place in where the Imam would eventually be slaughtered, Imam would tell her, "My sister Zainab, go back towards the tents. I do not want you to see what is about to befall your beloved brother, but rather the children, they are wailing, they are crying, they need comfort. Zainab, go back." And this is why Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam died completely on his own, with no one around him. What did they do? They threw his body to the ground. They trampled upon his body with horses' hooves. They cut his finger in order to steal his ring. They tore his body, and they began to be able to steal and ransack his clothes from his body. This is the way in which Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam was martyred. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the appearance of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, to allow us to be alongside him at all times in our life and in our death. If we are to pass away from this world before his coming, Ya Allah, raise us from our graves so that we can partake in the victories of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. We ask you, Ya Allah, grant us the ziyarah of Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam fi dunya wal akhirah. We ask you, Ya Allah, whatever our hajat are tonight, for our beloveds, our friends, our family, our communities, accept them, Ya Allah, bihaqqi Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam. We ask you, Ya Allah, in the final moments of our life, we die in the love of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, and that in our graves we are visited by the light of Imam al-Hadi salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh, in honor of our beloved 10th Imam. Please conclude this discussion with 3 loud salawat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. صلى